You're listening to
and such a short amount of time to do it in. We were really
a Mamamia podcast.
I wanted to start by saying ciao ci vediamo.
No,
That means see you later.
Yeah.
Ciao, come stai, bella?
Bene. E tu?
Che face?
That's probably the most Italian I have spoken since we came back to Australia.
Che cazzo dici?
Yeah, see.
I'm good at swearing in Italian because I lived there for a year as well.
Where were you?
I was in Florence.
How is it possible that I've been interviewing people on this podcast for, I don't know, 6 years, 7 years? And I've never interviewed this woman before. From Mamamia, you're listening to No Filter, a podcast where people from all walks of life tell their stories very candidly and aren't afraid to be vulnerable. My name is Mia Friedman. I've always been a bit intimidated by Kate Langbroek. I think it goes back to when I first saw her on a TV show that was called The Panel back in the 90s. It was like a precursor to the project. Same basic format, a desk, people talking about the events of the day, and Kate was the only woman on this show. And this one time, she actually breastfed her newborn on live TV. We'll get to that. I actually went on that show a few times as a guest and I met Kate and she just seemed impossibly cool. Not in a mean girl way. She wasn't unfriendly or arrogant or anything like that. It's more that she clearly knew who she was. We've passed through each other's orbit over the past 20 years since we first met, and I've always felt so warmly towards her. I've remained in awe of what she's accomplished and the way that she's never changed, even though she's become very, very famous. Her life, though, that has changed dramatically. Some of those changes have been because of choices that she made, like having 4 kids in 5 years or deciding to quit her high-profile, massively well-paid radio job hosting Brekkie Radio in Melbourne with Hughesy, Dave Hughes, and pack up all her family and take them to Italy. But other things that have thrown her world into chaos have been things that absolutely blindsided her, like her eldest child being diagnosed with cancer when he was just 7, and her marriage being put under the most unimaginable strain for years. Kate's written a book called Ciao Bella, and look, any excuse for me to speak Italian and speak to Kate, I'll take it. When people recognise you in the street, I imagine there are different, depending on their age, they will go, oh my God, and bring something up with you. What are the different things that they'll bring up?
Well, if I'm in Melbourne and they're old school Triple R people, they will make a point of saying that they used to listen to me on Triple R, which is the community radio station that I first started on, with Dave O'Neill, and Hughesy was a guest on that show. Otherwise, they might go to the start of Nova, which was, I think, 2001. Now people will say, oh, I grew up listening to you on my way to school. Or the Panel, obviously, which was mid to late 90s. I'm very bad with timelines, but the end of 90s. Or more recently, just from, obviously, the radio with Hughesy. That's so funny. Yes, there's a myriad of ways that people associate me with their life, the way that you do when you listen to a particular show or watch a TV show or whatever.
Yeah, like I remember Lee Sales always says that the people who know her from her podcast are very different to the people who know her from 7:30.
Right.
And I was thinking for you, there's a whole generation of people who will not know that you were nationwide famous for breastfeeding on the Panel, which it was the precursor of the project.
Yes, I did. And I didn't realise at the time how audacious that was for me to make milk come out of my boobs and to put it in a baby's mouth. I didn't realise that was a provocative act. I thought that was an act of nature. But I soon learned it wasn't.
It was before social media. You can only imagine what would have happened now. How did it unfold for you? Because it happened quite spontaneously, didn't it? You were doing a live panel show.
Yes, I think it was our first show back, my first show back, since I'd had my first baby, Lewis, and I think he was probably about 4 or 5 weeks old. And Peter, my husband, had come into the studio with me. We didn't know how it was going to go, as you don't when you have a baby for the first time or the second time or the third time or the fourth time. You never know how it's going to go, really, do you? I'd said to Peter, if he gets hungry or if he gets upset or whatever, just bring him to me and I'll just, look after him, right? It was pretty loose, the panel. I'd known the guys for a long time. I'd been in the meeting the day before. I'd breastfed Lewis, which was the subject of many jokes, of course, with the boys, with Glenn Robbins and Rob Sitch, Santo Chilaro, Tom Gleisner. And I was always of the school of thought. I mean, I was engrossed in what I was doing, but also I'm like, well, why shouldn't you enjoy your work? I don't care if you enjoy the side of me breastfeeding. You can enjoy your life any way you choose. But your right to swing your fist ends where my nose begins. All right. Anyway, so on the night, Peter was up the back of the studio and I was so euphoric because it was so nice to be back and social and have makeup done, be at the desk and be with my friends. And Lewis started crying. It was near the end of the show and Peter just brought him to me in the ad break. And I popped him on. That's all I knew to do with a child when they cried, a baby when they cried.
So
just that's all I did. I fed them through everything. If they were crying, if they were tired, if they had hiccups, if they had reflux, I'm just like, boop, boop. I popped Lewis on the breast and then I was almost, I think, going to leave the desk, but then we just came back on ours and he was just quite comfortably nestled in my arms on my right breast, which was always my good one. You've always got one good one.
And there was no visible nip or anything. It's not like it was kind of – you didn't have your boob out on the desk.
No. No, that's a different show, Mia.
That came later in your career.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, and then we really didn't think anything of it. I think there was a bit of chat about it at the desk, but it was gorgeous and everyone was so thrilled with a little baby. It was the end of the show. It had been a fun show. And then I went home and in those days we had answering machines. But also I was really tired because I just had a baby and I'd done a show and blah, blah, blah. And then we woke up to, in the middle of the night, the phone ringing and I think it was CNN or BBC. It was somewhere overseas. I can't really remember. And I was like, that's really weird. I'll turn the answering machine down. So we turned the phone down. Didn't think anything of it. And then the next day in normal hours, it was huge. Because I was still engrossed with having a baby, I didn't do any interviews about it. I didn't really engage with it at all, like CNN or whatever the American network was. Do you want to speak to us? I'm like, no, I don't. So I didn't.
Were people angry or upset or outraged, or was it just a big curiosity factor because it hadn't been seen before? I remember people said, was it a publicity stunt? That always made me laugh.
Yeah, that was an interesting one, especially in the light of the fact that I didn't do any publicity about it. Do you know what I mean? Like, would that I were such a mastermind. Mercifully, I'm not. I guess even then it was the news cycle, just you're feeding a monster. But I also didn't realise no one had ever done it before. I didn't know that. I soon found out that no one had done that before on television. Obviously, people have been breastfeeding babies for a long time. Curiously, the people from my mum and dad's church, who you would think would be more conservative, were very supportive of it.
Are your parents still Jehovah's Witnesses?
No.
You grew up in that church though, didn't you? Is it a church?
Yes, I did. I think it's officially a religion. Well, I think that there are some people who'd call it a cult. They don't call them churches, they call them kingdom halls. But it's a church. You go there on – anywhere you go on Sundays is a church. For some people, that's a beer garden.
That's so funny. What did it mean that you couldn't do growing up, or that you believed that you then had to unlearn once you left?
Well, the Jehovah's Witnesses doctrinally are defined, I guess, easily by what they don't do. So you don't celebrate Christmas, you don't celebrate birthdays, they don't have blood transfusions. What that really does effectively is segregate you from the rest of the world, because if you look at what most of your social engagements are, particularly when you're a child, they're birthday parties, yours or someone else's, or Easter, egg hunts, or Christmas, none of that. So it was very interesting at the time. People who weren't Jehovah's Witnesses were always like, oh, you poor thing. It was like a lot of that. But being a Jehovah's Witness, I didn't think I was a poor thing. That was all I knew, you know, and because I guess we had a very rich life within the witnesses socially, because there were 5 meetings a week and witnessing on the weekend, which is the door knocking. So I had friends, but as it turned out, they were very conditional friends, because when I left the witnesses, these people who purported to love me more than the outside world ever would, because the outside world was bad, worldly people are bad, those people apparently no longer love you if you leave the Jehovah's Witnesses. They love you so much they won't speak to you.
So like Scientology.
Well, I don't know about.
I remember there being some kids that I went to school with who, when we sang Christmas carols, they'd have to leave and go outside and stuff.
I was that child.
Yeah, so I was thinking this might be – this sounds very therapy, but when you were in Italy –
Oh, I love therapy.
Do you? Okay, so I'm just
I
going to –
I haven't had much of it, but fuck, I love it.
Get comfy on the couch, my friend.
Okay, good.
That feeling of being an outsider, was that something that you knew how to then do when you got to Italy and you didn't speak the language, you didn't have friends? You had your little tight group of your family, your nuclear family, but you were existing in this world and yet outside it. What do you think of that?
I think that that's probably spot on. But I hadn't articulated in those terms, but Peter and I had conversations obviously leading up to it, and because a lot of people, when we decided to move to Italy, the first thing that they said was, how can you do that to the children? And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, how can you get the kids to leave their school and their friends and whatever? And I'm like, but what are you going to do? Go through life like some multi-backed beast with a clanking chain of all the people you've ever known and loved with you? Because I think we had moved so much, because my parents were migrants as well. We'd moved around a lot when I was little. I realised in retrospect that was formative for me, to have gone to different places and to have met different people and to have had to start anew. Not that it was easy, but if I then look at life, anything that I've ever done that's been worthwhile has not been easy. Nothing. Nothing. And then the other thing that I would say to Peter all the time, because it was such a shit show trying to get there, you know, with visas and blah, blah, and schools, and there's a lot of people. There's 6 in our family, so that's anything we do, it's complicated. And Italy is also a complicated place. I would say to Peter all the time when he was like, oh, this is just, I'd go, people do it all the time. It's totally possible. People do it all the time. And then one day Peter said to me, darling, who do you know that's actually done it? And I was like, oh, I thought because of movies, or I don't know what I thought. I thought people do it all the time, but people actually don't do it all the time. Maybe they've got a company doing it for them and they move, or they're in the army or whatever. But when I got there, what you say is spot on, because it was almost like when you hear astronauts talk about when they first go into space, whatever that part is, where they first get to see the blue orb, you know. And I saw my life like that from Italy, because of the distance, the emotional distance, the physical distance, the time distance. And because I was away so long, I actually got to see everyone else with a perspective that you do not have when you're obviously right in it.
So true.
And it was quite fascinating. And I saw in it, this is also therapy, you know, you can see people's rackets, you can see how they play you, you can see the role that you're complicit in with that, because, you know, people always do what they want to do, even if they don't enjoy it and they don't like it. At some level, you have agency.
Yeah.
And I also saw really clearly the people that I loved, like the people that my heart yearned for, or that I was just, you know, exultant at the thought of seeing. It was a really interesting revision of my own life, a review, you know. There were some KPIs that had to be, you know.
Did you change a lot when you got back?
Well, Australia had changed a lot when we came back. So I can't tell now at what point I've changed. And the country has changed, and we've been in lockdowns. I spent so long in lockdown. And even before COVID started, Peter and I had had that first year together. And that was essentially like we were in lockdown together.
Yeah.
We'd worked through a lot of that stuff. No one had ever, prior to retirement, spent as long with their husband as I spent, or their kids, with like no other circuit breakers. Aside from Italy, that was magnificent, of course.
Quite the circuit breaker. You had 4 kids under 6. Did you mean to have that many?
No, but obviously I didn't mean to not have them, or I would have, like you said, I'm a grown-up. But am I?
Do you know how babies are made? I remember being surprised when you kept having them because you started quite late, didn't you?
I was surprised too. Well, yes. I mean, we all start. Well, you didn't start late. You started early and then you took a big break.
I started
then
early and
came
finished
back.
late. Still going. I mean, not with new ones, but yeah, I spread it out. But you did it in a very short space of time.
And it was interesting because when I had Lewis, I always thought I would have children, but it was always like an abstract notion, like one day. But Peter was always very clucky, like mad keen. He'd had his older brother had a baby, James, and he loved babies, and he just was always, let's have a baby. I'm like, oh, which is also a different narrative than you hear from a lot of women with their male partners or whatever.
Is he much younger than you?
He is 9 years younger than me.
And it's also the very different narrative than you hear when there's an age gap, because it's your biological clock is often ticking if you're the older woman, but the younger guy's like, oh, I'm not ready yet.
Exactly. And so we were fantastically, actually, luckily, fortunately, the opposite of that. I remember when we were in hospital and we just had Lewis. Lewis was like 2 hours old and I went, let's have another one. Like, this is so amazing. And he was like, calm down. Actually, I don't think he was. I think he was probably like, yeah.
Okay, let's go.
Yeah. And he comes from a family of 4.
Okay.
It was different from situation to situation. Like when I think I was pregnant for the 3rd time, I came back from the doctor and we were really struggling then, like just working and baby and a toddler and blah, blah, blah. To Peter, I said, I've got something to tell you and you're not going to like it. And he said, it better be cancer.
He should have touched wood.
I was pregnant. But then the 4th time I cried and he was over the moon. Isn't that weird?
Did you ever feel done, like after the 4th one? Were you like...
No, I didn't feel done. But then our eldest son got leukemia and that done us, because having a cancer journey is not sexy.
Like most people, I wasn't aware during Lewis's illness that he was sick, and you kept working. You wrote about it so beautifully in the book. You said, I thought I could not bear it, but I did. And you also talked about how you had to sort of internalize all your bone-shaking fear to be strong for him and to keep him calm at a time when you also had 3 little babies. How old was Lewis and how did you find out that he was unwell?
He was 6 and he had been sick for a few weeks, not peaking sick, but just, you know, when your kids are off. We'd been to the doctor twice, had antibiotics. Antibiotics weren't doing anything. The 3rd time he'd been at a family party with his cousins and my mother-in-law, Marie, who I talk about in the book, said he couldn't even play. He was just lying on the couch. And when she brought him home, we were going to take him to the doctor again. And luckily, my mother-in-law went to the doctor with him. She said, I don't like this. This is not right. And she had a fight with the doctor because she was going to give us more antibiotics. She said, if you don't like it, take him to the children's hospital. And we took him to the children's hospital, and that night we were in the children's cancer clinic. And we found out that very often it's the grandmothers who pick it in children. Very often it's the grandmothers with their entire, well, because we're busy and we're whatever, and you're always assuming, you're looking here and you're something and you're right, darling, and here's some Panadol and don't go to school today. But a grandmother with her wise eyes that have seen myriad children and she was like, this is not right.
I've got goosebumps.
And she was right. Yeah, me too. That was where we were. And that's where we were for the next 4 years or 3.5 years. It's a longer treatment. Lewis had T-cell ALL. That was the leukemia that he had, and the treatment is longer than it is for girls because boys have got testicles and it hides in the testicles, in the brain fluid, the spinal fluid, the testicles, and so the treatment's longer. And so that's what we did for the next 3.5 years.
You also had 3 other children.
Yes.
And a full-time job. Your youngest was 5 months. I assume you were still breastfeeding?
Yes, I was. Yes.
For publicity, obviously. How do you, when you have to, nature makes us focus on the weakest member of the pack because they need us. How did you continue over those 4 years to not just parent your other 3 children, but get to know them when you were so focused on Lewis?
I probably won't find out until those kids are in therapy and those kids are grown up and writing books.
Which they all do and they all will.
Well, we were always very conscious of that. Once we got into the routine of hospital, I say routine, but there was hardly ever a routine. And in the first year when Lewis was really terribly, terribly, terribly sick, obviously we were with him a lot, but we would take the children in with us. But often he couldn't come home with us even because we had 3 unvaccinated children and his immunity was so low. So then he would go to my mother-in-law's and she'd set up her back room for him, and we called it the sanatorium, and she had his school lessons up. She used to be a school teacher, and we were always between somewhere. So the kids would come and see him, but it was you're right, the attention has to go to the sick one, but you also have to be mindful of the fact that there's 3 other living people whose lives are emerging. So we would kind of juggle it. Marie would stay at the hospital with Lewis. I would stay at the hospital with Lewis. Peter would stay at the hospital with Lewis. And whichever one of us was not there would be at home with the other kids, or when possible we'd take the kids in to see him. Or he was home with us, which also was very strange. The kids were so little, they hardly remember any of it now. But I do remember one night when we had a very long stay on the ward. I think we'd been there for like 37 days or something. And when I came home, Sunday, who's our daughter closest in age to Lewis, she's 16 now, and she was 5 when he was diagnosed. She was really upset and she just wanted to see Lewis. So I got the little kids, I put them to bed, I got them out of bed. I said, come on, you can come in your pajamas. We're going to the hospital. We're going to see Lewis. And it was, not visiting hours or whatever, but I took the little kids in. And when Sunday saw Lewis, she burst into tears and she just flopped on his hospital bed and was just cuddling him and rubbing his bald head. And so obviously there will be an impact from that. That's life. It's like COVID now, isn't it? That you, as a parent, never really know what the balance is about what you need to expose your children to help them leave the nest, and what you protect them from to keep them protected in the nest. Who gets that balance right? I don't know. But we were very open with the children about what Lewis was going through, but we did not focus on any projected outcomes other than wellness, because we also daren't entertain them for ourselves even.
You write about how your friends closed ranks around you.
Yes.
In the most remarkable way. What are some of the things that you remember about just gestures and acts of kindness over those years?
They were myriad, really, and took different forms depending on what the person's, skill set, I guess, was. And, there were baskets of homegrown vegetables on the porch, and the mums from school made us meals, and a girlfriend, Peter, loved her pesto. So she'd just, on the porch, there'd be like one of those, jam jars with the pretty checkered lids. Is it Bon Mama or whatever?
Yeah.
With pesto, and we'd like, Marianne's dropped off some pesto, and people prayed. They prayed. They dropped off religious artefacts depending on what their religion was. Sometimes if we had like a little window, they would have something so that Peter and I could go somewhere for an hour and just be with grown-ups and not talk about cancer. There were some friends who couldn't do it. Not many. There were some who couldn't do it.
That must have been so hurtful.
Not really. I mean, I kind of understand why people can't do it. I do understand why people can't do it. I mean, of course, you love the people who rise.
Yeah.
Like girlfriends of mine, my girlfriend Miranda was just like, and she was busy with 3 boys of her own. Oh, that's like the Brady Bunch song. But she was like, she would come at the drop of a hat to the children's hospital. And to go into the cancer ward at the children's hospital is a very confronting thing.
Mm.
Even if you're not going in to see someone you love, it's very hard. So I understand people that can't do it. And I understand the people who don't know what to say, because I think once in my life I was that person. There are still occasions where you don't know what to say.
What do you say? What should you say?
I think it's different from situation to situation. I know a lot of people, because you're very raw, people can say things with love that you interpret as abrasive at the time, possibly. I think there's a lot of that around at the moment where people are like, I can't believe they said that to you.
Yeah.
But I do try to err on the side of giving people the benefit of the doubt.
Mm.
And there was only really one time that I remember where someone was so deeply hurtful in what they said that I was so shocked. I could hardly process what they'd said to me. But otherwise, I just think people were just trying their best in a terrible situation.
The stuff of breakfast radio, which you were doing, I mean, apart from the punishing hours, you have to go on every day and mine your life for content and for laughs.
Yes.
You and your co-host. And it is an extraordinary thing that you are extraordinary at. How do you do that over 4 years when your life is not funny and what's happening is so private that you can't even talk about it?
Well, there still was a lot of funny stuff in life. There still was, and there had to be. Not cancer, obviously. One of the things that they said to us at the hospital when Lewis was first diagnosed that sounded impossible was they said, you have to live a normal life. Lewis was diagnosed in the December, and so we had that entire 8 weeks or whatever before there was even a question of going back to work. And the doctors and nurses were like, you have to go back to work. You have to live a normal life. And we were like, what? Like how? Nothing felt like it could ever be normal again. And then one of our doctors said to us, if you don't live a normal life, what are you telling your child? And what are you telling your other children?
Whew.
Yes, which who would ever have thought of it from that point of view? So that's what we endeavoured to do, and there were actually tracks of time when I wasn't doing the show.
Because you couldn't?
Because I couldn't, because I had to be elsewhere.
Mm.
And because I couldn't bring, like you said, the gift of mourning to people. But that said, I subscribe to the notion to a certain extent that your emotional muscles are like any other muscles, and the more you use certain ones, the stronger they get. So my positivity muscles are pretty strong.
And your resilience muscles, I imagine, as well, in the face of adversity.
Well, you'd hope so, wouldn't you?
Mm.
Not impenetrable, but pretty strong. And so it became as much a gift to me, and also Hughesy and Sash and all our immediate family of our show and our guests. Everyone knew what was happening. And there was a rallying of people in our industry as well. In fact, in our business, in what's that, showbiz, everyone knew.
Mm.
A lot of journalists in Melbourne knew and held it private for us, which was very appreciated. Work is a salvation.
Mm.
It really is. And so it became a place for me as well where I would have 3 hours, very early hours, that weren't about cancer as well. So it was good for me as well. And then, sometimes Hughesy would come into the hospital straight after work, or Sash would come in. So it sort of blended into our world. When Lewis was down, we were all down. And when Lewis was up, we were all up.
And is there a time that you are given, with his condition, that you are given the all clear?
That's interesting because generally I think the thinking is 5 years, which we're well past now, but Lewis is now in the long-term effects clinic because of the treatment, because he had radiation. And so they just monitor him for, thyroid, Skin cancer is a big one because of the chemo. I tend to think of it as that, we all have a cloud over us, and most of us just don't know what that cloud is. With Lewis, we know what the cloud is.
Was there a time with you where obviously there was a moment that you felt comfortable to share it publicly?
Yeah.
And you spoke about it on the show, so that must have been a particular milestone.
It was unexpected when it happened. It was on his birthday, the year he had finished treatment. So he finished treatment in the around Easter. And his birthday is in August, and his birthday is the day before mine. And I said to Sash and Hughesy, I think I have to talk about Lewis. And Hughesy was like, oh, okay, like whatever, because they were always like, well, whenever you're ready to share it. And because, like you said, it's such an intimate relationship with breakfast show listeners, I wanted to share it with them. And I didn't want to carry it anymore. For a long time I held it because it was also not my story. It was Lewis's story. You know that?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I went, I'm going to do it. And I think it was about, I don't know, it was about 7:45, and Hughesy went, can you hold it till 8 o'clock? I'm like, sure.
No, it's coming out of me.
I mean, it had taken me by surprise that I was ready to do it. And I think I called Peter and I said, I think I'm going to talk about Lewis. And he went, all right, darling. He said, I hope you don't mind if I don't listen.
I wanted to ask about you and Peter. A lot of relationships don't survive the illness of a child. You guys have been together for, I want to say 20 years or close to it.
Yes.
There was a time that you guys weren't together.
Yes, there was. We had like I don't know, was it a year? Maybe it was a year and a half.
There are seasons of relationships like that. I was just saying to my husband this morning, we're in a good season right now. And sometimes you have many seasons in one day, as the song goes. Yeah. But the season that you guys had, you've been through some really interesting, forged in fire seasons of your relationship. There's having lots of little kids and a lot of people don't get through
Yes.
that. And then you had Lewis's illness, and then you had that period of catching our breath, and then you had Italy. How have the different seasons sort of affected your relationship? How's it changed? If that's not too personal a question.
No, it's a really good question. Gee, it's a big answer,
Yeah, I know.
though, isn't
Just
it?
quickly, just briefly. No.
Yeah, that's right. I think any good relationship evolves. And also, I realised I'm pretty good at relationships. So if I look at my life, like my relationship with Hughesy, breakfast show relationships or radio partnerships often don't survive, or famously they don't speak to each other off air, or, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I'm quite good at relationships, and my husband's also good at relationships. He's very considered and slow. I say in the book, he's like a glacier. His nickname's Lazy Pete. On the surface, it looks like nothing's happening. But if you stand in front of him for 10,000 years, Mia, he will mow you down, right? Whereas I, of course, am not. I am,
Quicksilver.
right. That's a lovely expression. Anyway, and I think that's quite complimentary. Obviously, we had moments, when Lewis was sick, where things were terrible. Of course they were terrible. They were terrible personally. They were terrible individually and collectively. But I always think the measure of a good relationship is not how you are when things are good, because everyone's good when things are good. If you're in a relationship that's not good when things are good, there's just no hope. But the measure is when you have to address, you have to open the cupboard where the spiders live and clean out that cupboard, how you come back from that. And Peter is just one of the most remarkable people I know and because I work in showbiz, I'm also struck by this. He responds without ego. Amazing to me. Very considered, very pragmatic, able to see from the other person's point of view, and a beautiful person, really beautiful person, much nicer than me. And I think it's good to have a partner that makes you better. And also sometimes he's very frustrating, and I'm very frustrating for him. But I think after a while, it's the river flowing over the rocks, and the river stones become smooth, but you have to let the river flow over you. We spend a lot of, or I did, trying to dam the river. Stop the hair, change the flow. I don't want it going that way. And after a while, I think from exhaustion, because of all the factors in my life you've mentioned, I just couldn't. I was just like, I'm just going with the flow. And the more I go with the flow, the smoother my jagged edges become. And his.
I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter with Kate Langbroek. I was one of those people that was surprised when I heard that you were going to live in Italy with all your kids. I was like, why would she do that? She's on top of her career. And also we've got kids similar ages.
Yeah.
My youngest are around the same age as yours. And I thought, oh my God, imagine extracting your kids from their friends and their schools. That is why would she do that? And it wasn't until I read your book and you talked about the impetus and the effect of Lewis's cancer diagnosis that was a big reason for you going.
Yes, I think it was. In retrospect, you see the footsteps differently.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like, we have to go live in Italy because our son nearly died. It was never that. Most motivations are never that overt, are they? They're subtle. But for me, I think it was, because why did I have this compulsion to do this? I had the greatest job in the world, beautiful relationship with my co-host and Sash, our producer, who'd been with us from the start, and my family and Peter's family. There was no, got to get out of Dodge, other than what Peter and I both craved, which was some kind of reset. I think Peter doesn't think it's got so much to do with Lewis. But for me, it meant something about life. And also the way the Italians live. Something from the first time we went there, I was just like, oh, my goodness. It just piles cliche on cliche. It's just phenomenal. And something about that, the richness of their life, just called me. And Peter was even like, you won't go, you won't stop, you can't stop work, you won't give up your job. No one gives up a job like you've got. Like, you know what radio's like. People get carried out in boxes or pushed down the stairs, you know. It's unusual. And I was like, I will. Oh, I will. And I did.
I also wondered at the time, I have it in my head that you're the breadwinner, the primary breadwinner in the family.
Oh, sort of, have been. Am again now because of COVID, because Peter was an electrical engineer and then bought a bar and then had a couple of bars. But, of course, there's no bars now. There haven't been bars for 2 years. So,
because I wondered how you walked away from that paycheck, that big radio money, to not work for a year. That must have taken a lot of planning.
well, I mean, because the paychecks have been big and we live in the same house we've lived in for 16 years and I drive a 12-year-old car, that was what our money was for. We're not, you know, car people or house flippers or whatever. But we did have to plan that. I mean, if you want to do something, generally you'll find a way to do it. And when I agreed to work for the first 6 months, that also paved the way for us to stay there. So, and not to have to worry about that so much.
I've heard it described in such a good way that as your kids get older, as parents, you go from being managers to being consultants.
I don't really know what consultants do, by the way.
Exactly. A consultant sort of gives some advice from the outside that you can then, as the business owner, choose to do or not do. But the consultant has no real power.
Right. Yes. Right. Yes. Oh, I get it. Yeah.
So it's kind of like, here's what I think you should do, but you can't make them do it, essentially, as a consultant. Your kids were all around that age that you make that transition as parents when you're in Italy. So in some ways, when they should have been stretching their wings, you were all very tightly bonded in Italy.
Yes.
How did that play out, even before lockdown and COVID?
Okay, so a lot of people ask about doing this with their children, and I would say to them that you have a window in which it's easy, probably that transition from management to consultant. And with Lewis especially, we slightly missed the window because by the time we got to Italy, we discovered he had a secret girlfriend back in Australia.
Ouch.
Yeah. But it was still, because he kept it secret, I was like, well, mate, you know, we're just going to proceed as though this is not happening because you haven't actually told us it's happening.
And if you knew if it was happening, would you have not gone to Italy with the rest of the family?
No, but we would have addressed it and had a,
right.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe she would have come over with her family or, I don't know, to visit or something, I don't know. In those days, in the olden days,
you could do such things.
Travel. You might want to Google travel and just generally that feeling of wanting to be cemented, I think. But the little boys, of course, were the beauty of the malleable child is that the most important people in their world is you. So if they're with you, it's perfect.
That's the window, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the window. So I would say the window is probably till about, depending on how precocious and sophisticated your children are, I'd say from 14 the window starts to come down.
I thought about you a lot when you were away and I kept thinking, why doesn't she come home? Because I got scared. Were you ever scared? What was the worst, most scary day?
Okay, it came upon us so suddenly. My husband and I were in Venice for a weekend away, our first weekend together in months, when they shut down Venice. We were going to a fancy dress ball. We were going to Carnival. And even that wasn't scary because it happened so suddenly, we made haste to book our tickets back to Bologna because I'm like, what happens if they shut borders or whatever? So I felt this fear. It was big fear.
Like existential fear.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And where you get the mind of a rat in a maze, like what are our options? What can we do?
Yeah.
We've got petrol in the car. We've got da-da-da. We've got a 5-litre tin of olive oil. I've got, that. And then I went, okay, so I felt that fear, and what did it do for me? It weakened me and it laid me low. And I will endeavour to not operate from a place of fear again.
Wow.
It's an ambit claim, isn't it? I mean, you want
You
that
will,
for yourself.
but you'll try not to.
Yeah, correct. But just to acknowledge it in yourself,
Yeah.
that what fear does for you. People are so fearful at the moment. The climate has been very fearful, and it does not bring out the best in people.
It does not. It unfolded slowly and then fast. Italy was after Wuhan, was first cab off the rank.
We were the first. And where we were, also the region that we were in Emilia-Romagna, and that Lombardia region where Milan is, which was an hour from us, was the region where it struck first in Italy.
Did you have a family meeting and investigate just getting to the airport and getting home?
We didn't have a family meeting. We had a parent meeting.
Yes, I was going to imagine you had to stay calm for the kids.
I'm not involving the kids in that because why? When they announced that they were closing the airport, so where we lived in Bologna in the north has its own international airport, which is the greatest international airport in the world. It's about as big as our house. It's not.
Wow.
But it's a small international airport, really small, which means it's really manageable, but you can hop on an Emirates flight and you can get to Dubai and then to Australia. So it was fantastic. When they announced that they were stopping flights, Peter and I had been investigating getting flights back to Australia. But then the decision was made for us because nobody in Europe would let us transit because we were Italians. So that decision was made for us, which is why I'm glad we didn't bring the kids into it because, a lot of rugs got pulled in that period. And so we were like, well, it's decided we're going to stay here. And by that stage, we were managing lockdown and we were, we had a few weeks of it under our belt, and the kids' school, considering it was Italy, had pivoted really quickly and efficiently into online schooling.
That's
which is
amazing
in Italy.
Yeah. Efficiency and pivoting is not really usually a strength of the Italian systems.
No, but we were at an international school and clearly, they were motivated, as most people and institutions are, by self-interest as well as by a sense of duty, So that was merciful and great. And because of the school year being different, this is why we dallied a bit, because the kids were nearly at the end of their school year, which was June, and then if we came back here, then what's going to happen with them there, whatever. And in that
and
time,
then it was taken out of your hands.
Yeah.
I know what made you decide to go, but what made you finally decide to call time on your Italian adventure?
We had always been booked to come back for Christmas of that year, and we were sort of like, we'll play it by ear a bit. But then it just became more and more apparent. Like, my dad was sick. Lewis and I came back and did quarantine to see him when he nearly died in July of last year. And the kids wanted to come back. They wanted to be with family. It had been such, even though we loved Italy to the end, there's no place like home. And we wanted things for them that we have in Australia.
Like what?
A backyard. I wanted, less so, but things like to be able to hop in a car and drive somewhere instead of being in a medieval walking city, which was also amazing and beautiful and very good for fitness, by the way, but not good for laziness. And I just wanted to – I worked so hard in that period of lockdown. that it was almost spiritual.
It's hard to explain to people who haven't lived in another country, particularly one where English is not the first language, how there's so much friction in everything. Like nothing is easy. It doesn't mean that it's not amazing, but like going to the post office, getting your phone repaired, like there's so many more steps and there's so much more friction when you don't speak the language and it's not your country.
Yes, you have to fortify yourself before you leave the house for any
there's nothing that's just default, white noise in the background. What aspects, just finally, of Italian life have you brought home with you?
That is funny you say that, because when we came back over summer, we were on holidays with friends and we were like, we're going to have the Italian tradition of dressing up for aperitivo. You know, the Italians dress up every evening. They make an effort for each other and themselves. Like beauty is not a shallow construct there. It's very deep and to the core of who they are. I'm like, we're all going to dress up. I'm not going to be my normal, depressed, pilling singlet self at cocktail hour. So I think the first night we were away on holidays with a bunch of friends. The first night we dressed up, and then after that it fell by the wayside. Literally one night I did it, and then I'm like, it's a lot of work. I'm just going to stay in my togs and with my sarong and my sea salt hair and our thongs, thongs. But I think the way we eat, I don't snack now. I've had that beaten out of me in Italy by virtue of the fact that they don't snack. Living in Italy made us realise how Australian we are.
Speak to that. What do you mean?
And it was a great thing for the Italians because they love Australians and they love the Australianness of us, even though they found us crazy, as they would say. But Australians generally are much slobbier than Italians.
So much more.
The thought of wearing thongs outside to them is anathema. Like to wear it as like footwear is just like,
I have one more question. Has it changed the way you think about work?
Well, partly the reason that I didn't come back and do a breakfast show again with Hughesy was because I didn't want to work at that intensity again.
Even for loads more money.
Exactly. I mean, money's always handy, isn't it? The only people who say money can't buy happiness is rich people.
Rich people.
Yeah, they're the only people who say that. But the greatest gift you can give yourself, I believe, is the gift of time. And that's changed in me. And not to say I wouldn't ever do it again, but at the moment I can't believe who I was, even when I surrendered to lockdown in Italy. And it was such hard work, but of a different kind than I'd ever done before. I loved who I was and I loved how I felt. And one morning I remember I got up and I made the kids breakfast and they went to school, which was in the lounge room. And I went, I don't have to do anything until lunchtime. Like nothing. I've never had that in my whole adult life. And I got back into bed and I read a book. And it was it's like a tiny thing. It was enormous for me. And as much as possible, I would like to keep that sense of freedom and freshness in myself, where a lot of my energy that's expended in my work, that joyfully expended because I love my work. But if you can expend it more on yourself and nourish yourself a little bit more. And I don't even mean in a, self-love sort of way, because that mantra really irritates me. It's the greatest gift you can give yourself. Not always possible. Like when we come back, I've been working like a navvy. But the freedoms in here the freedoms
in
in
your
here.
head.
Yeah. And then Lewis said to me the other day, Mum, we were talking about Hughesy, and I think he was coming over to pick up a copy of the book. And Lewis said to me, and the whole family loves Uncle Hughesy. Could there be a creepier nickname?
Not really.
No.
At least he's cut his hair a bit.
Yeah.
Slightly less creepy.
Lewis said to me, why did you stop working with Hughesy, Mum? Why did you? That was an interesting question. And I was holding my book. My book was on the bench, like here, and I said to him, and I couldn't think of how to articulate it because I hadn't even articulated it to myself. I just knew I didn't want to work at that level. But I said, this is what 2 years of not working with Hughesy looks like.
Oh, wow. A whole book.
Me, my book, my story.
Thank you for listening to this No Filter. I couldn't stop talking to Kate. We barely even talked about Italy. I just felt so connected to her. I hope you could feel that, and I hope you feel the same way. I think that's a bit of a special magic that she has. She's just very warm and down to earth, and she cuts through all the bullshit and just connects. I think that's what's made her such an incredible talent and superstar on radio, and why people love watching her on TV. And now her book is just so beautifully written, and you get even more of an insight into her. You can find a link to Ciao Bella in the show notes. And if you're looking for something more, have a listen to Mamamia out loud. It's like having your best friends in your ears 3 times a week. Well, 5 if you're an M+ subscriber. Holly, Jessie, and me, Mia, explore what women are actually talking about. Check it out wherever you get your podcasts. We've had a massive bumper year on Out Loud. We've been doing the show for a while, but we have never had so many downloads. It's really, really going off. So find out what all the fuss is about and listen wherever you get your podcasts. The assistant producer of No Filter is Lucy Neville, and the executive producer is Eliza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and if you want even more of us in your life, come and visit the Mamamia app, where you'll find all the best content for women on the internet. Just by reading or listening to our content, you are helping to fund girls in schools in some of the most disadvantaged countries in the world through our partnership with Room to Read. Did you know that? We're currently funding 300 girls to go to school every single day, and our aim is to get to 1,000 and then 10,000. And by listening to this podcast and consuming our content, you're helping us do that.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.